For those who I haven't met yet, I'm Miranda Hitchcock. I'm one of the founders of Every Dog Behavior and Training. We are a nonprofit in Austin, Texas, that is all about getting inclusive and accessible dog training and behavior resources to our community and beyond. So we love having folks from different places. If you want to drop in the chat where you are joining us from, that would be awesome. I know we've got a crowd from all over the place here today. So a couple of quick notes for today. One, we are recording. So if your internet falls apart, if you have to go, if something else happens, don't panic. We will send out the link as soon as it is on YouTube, which will hopefully be tomorrow. So recordings are there. There are captions available. So if you need those, you should be able to find them through the subtitles area. If you're having trouble finding those, just let me know. Please keep yourselves muted. I will be doing the same thing in case my dog wants to bark at the Amazon truck. But keeping yourself muted means that we can hear Rachel throughout the presentation. If you have questions for Rachel, please put them in the chat. If there's anything going on, if you're having technical difficulties, things like that, feel free to put that in the chat directly to me as well. But any of your questions can go in the chat. That way, I will get them to Rachel at the end so that they will also be on the YouTube recording. I think that is all of my brief notes. A couple things to know. One, we are a 501c3 organization. We are a nonprofit in the US. That means that donations allow us to do a lot of the work that we do. So we would love it if you would consider making a donation. It helps us offer really cool programs to the public. We also have some cool swag that says dog training is for everyone. We think that that's really important. We think it should be true. Right now, not always the case. But if you want a really soft t-shirt, stuff like that, or a nice hoodie, we've got those available. And please make sure that you're signing up for upcoming webinars. We have one coming up in a couple of weeks from Juliana DeWillems about navigating social media and dog training advice on social media and what to watch out for. And then another one about anxiety and human anxiety and dog anxiety, and are they linked and how are they linked? So some cool things upcoming. Make sure that you're signed up for those, and you can see all of our previous webinars on our website as well. And then a thank you to Maddie's Fund. This webinar is funded as part of a grant from Maddie's Fund. So hashtag thanks to Maddie for this and for their support of cool programs. So I think that is all of my things for you. And without further ado, I will pass it along to Rachel to introduce himself.
All right, brilliant. Let me just start sharing my screen. I hope everyone can see that. Miranda, is that okay?
Yep, you are all good.
All right, perfect. Welcome, everyone. First of all, I just want to thank Miranda for asking me to be on here and providing me with this platform. I really appreciate it because this is a topic that I really love talking about. So this webinar today is called Reactivity, Easy Mode Activated, and I must thank my dog trainer and gamer friend, Sabrina Leaney from World of Woof, for helping me to come up with this title, because I am not always the most creative with things like this. But to start off with, just a little bit about me. I am a Victoria Stilwell Academy graduate, a certified Control Unleashed instructor, and a fear-free certified professional. Before I became a dog trainer, I was a sound engineer. That's why you might see all the gear. And I still do a bit of freelance for sound design for games and stuff like that. So that's just something that I like doing on the side. And you can see that come up here. Some of you may know about my dog, Dave. He's a Singapore Special, which is what we call mixed breed street dogs in Singapore. So he was from Singapore, like myself. He was likely a street dog who then ended up living in the shelter for 7 years before I adopted him and flew him all the way to the UK with me. He was incredibly reactive, especially when he was at the shelter. He was very much reactive to other dogs, but he is so much better now. And he even has dog friends that he hangs out with. And we actually have one of his dog friends who comes over to stay with us when her human is away. So that's happening right now. With my business, Dog at Heart, I run a virtual reactivity program for dog guardians to help and support them with their reactive or fearful dogs. I also run a podcast called Out of the Woofworks, which is about dogs, training, and human social justice issues. So hopefully that gives you a little sense of my background and where I'm coming from. So let's make things easier on yourself and in turn on your dog. You probably know by now how in tune you and your dog are together. How your dog feels and behaves can really impact on how you're feeling yourself. As for our dogs, they can read our body language so well and so closely sometimes that the subtle changes in how we behave when we feel a certain way can be picked up by them. But at the same time, let's not forget how hard the world is at the moment. We're still in a pandemic. We are influenced by capitalism, which tells us that we have to keep being productive, keep working, keep performing. Otherwise, we're a failure and we don't deserve good things, or we don't even deserve to have our basic needs. And these capitalist values can impact how we view our life and training with our dogs too. And that's what I'm hoping we can shift with this webinar. On top of that, some of us experience other oppressive systems as well, things like racism, queerphobia, ableism, and so on. So there's a lot of pressures there and a lot to deal with emotionally. So it's understandable that thinking about working with your dog, especially if you have a dog displaying reactive or fearful behaviors like lunging, barking, growling, or hiding away and avoidance, that can all feel really tiring and really overwhelming at times. You're not alone and you're not a bad person for feeling this way. So let's put reactivity work on easy mode and not nightmare mode. Let's be cozy gamers here and not esports champions. I hope some of you understand that. But let's look at why we want to do things in easy mode. So first of all, we want to effectively help our dogs, and we can only really effectively do so when we aren't so stressed out ourselves. Because when we are bogged down with the stress of everything else going on, it's hard to stay focused with our dogs. It's hard to have, clarity on things like how can we set the environment up for our dogs to be more comfortable or successful, so on and so forth. It helps when we are in the right headspace where we're working with our dogs. And it's also okay if we aren't in that headspace sometimes. And we'll get into that a little bit later. Secondly, your dog needs rest too. Sometimes we think that, we have this dog and we have to do all these things with them every single day. We worry a lot about them being bored, and sometimes we feel guilty if we don't do enough with them in a day, which again, that guilt can become more pressure and stress on us. But really, our dogs need rest too, just like us, and they can be quite happy with a day of no training or just more enrichment, or maybe even just more sleep and rest. Rest is a need, rest is enrichment too. I know my dog Dave, he would be quite happy to spend quite a bit of the day just sleeping by himself in his office, as we like to call it. Third, you matter. Of course you do. And how you're feeling on this journey with your dog really matters. So you have to really look after yourself and really meet your own needs as well. I emphasize this a lot with the dog guardians I'm working with. I really want everyone to feel well and comfortable with what they're doing. Fourth, burning out is a real possibility in working with our own dogs, and we don't want that because we know how much our dogs need us. And if you feel burnt out, then it's hard to help them at all. And as I mentioned, we really work better like our dogs when we have less of this pressure on us. So let's get right into how we're going to get into easy mode. Oops, where is this? There we go. So firstly, we need to have a little bit of a mindset switch, and that is that behavior is just information. It is valuable information, of course. But reactive behaviors like lunging, barking, growling, snapping are all information as well. And I don't say this as a way to kind of remove all emotions from this discussion or to discount what our dogs are feeling. I think it is absolutely important to help our dogs feel safe as much as we can. But a reactive moment or a reactive incident does not mean failure, and it does not mean bad dog, and it does not mean you're a bad dog guardian. It's not the end of the world, is what I'm saying. It's information on what we can do to help our dogs more effectively later on or in the future. I think it's unrealistic to think that, once we start on this reactivity journey with our dogs, that we'll be able to prevent them from having any reactive behaviors at all. And again, to have those expectations puts a lot of unnecessary pressure on ourselves. I mean, remember that our dogs are sentient beings, and like us as sentient beings, we all may react to certain things in a certain way. And even the seemingly least reactive of dogs can growl, bark, and lunge in certain situations that are just way too overwhelming for them. So certain contexts can lead that to happen. Is it possible for us as human beings to never be reactive ourselves? I find that quite unlikely. And so I don't expect dogs to be that way either. I think it's common, for many of us also to feel like our dogs reflect us. So we worry that our dog's behaviors make us seem like a bad guardian, like we can't handle or train our dogs, which for some may lead to using more punishment-based methods to suppress their dog's behaviors. But for many of us, using force-free methods or positive reinforcement-based methods, we may just end up holding on to a lot of that guilt, which isn't so good. And I say this because in my early days of having just adopted Dave, when he was still quite reactive, and if he reacted to an off-leash dog, I would get really upset, even like 15 minutes after the incident, worrying about how this would set Dave's progress back, worrying about how he's feeling, and worrying about my own capabilities as someone starting out as a dog trainer at the time. And thankfully, my partner, Human Dave, as we call him, he's a very chill guy. So he would just be like, just look at Dave. Do you think he is still thinking about what happened, or is he happily sniffing and just going about his day now? And sure enough, Dave is just happily sniffing, just doing his thing. And of course, like I said, Dave is fine for the most part now. And I'm quite sure he's not ever thinking about that one reactive incident from 3 years ago anymore. So these emotions are absolutely normal for us to feel. I'm not saying don't feel them, but certainly if we can shift our mindset to one that is kinder towards ourselves, we can reduce our own stress, and maybe we'll be able to be more ready to reinforce something great that our dog happens to do next after the reaction. I also mentioned here that it can even inform you of your dog's health. And what I mean by that is that if you're seeing a sudden spike in your dog's reactive behaviors and nothing in the environment has really changed that much, then you may want to question whether there's something going on pain-wise for your dog. Sudden reactive, aggressive, or fearful withdrawn behaviors can be a sort of pain and discomfort signal. So we must not miss that. And we then have to kind of get our dogs the help and relief as soon as we can. So now that we understand that behavior is information, valuable information, what can we do with that? So first of all, we can record our observations. So on top of videoing our walks if we can, and videoing our training, which all of this is fantastic for observing body language that we might miss in a moment, or observing our own kind of training mechanics and what we're doing. Writing and noting things down can help as well. So if you like handwriting stuff, a physical diary can be for you, or if you like typing, Evernote can be a good software, or even just plain old notepad is fine. But if you're into using apps, you can try something like Dailyo or Bearable, which are actually apps designed for humans and supporting mental health and overall health and things like that. So it's getting you to kind of log your moods and see how you're feeling over time, and doing so fairly easily. So I'll show you how these apps look like in a bit, but you could also get both of these apps and have one that you use for your dog and one you use for yourself and, for taking care of yourself. If it feels like a lot to make notes about the whole day with your dog or of all the reactions they've had, even just a note at the end of your day saying whether you felt like, overall this has been a pretty good, average, or kind of a bad day can help. Or you can also just do a simple tally of how many reactions happened in that day. Again, I don't want to put pressure on anyone. If you're feeling too tired, if there's a lot going on for you, it's not like you still have to log everything and remember every single thing that happened. I know that can be quite stressful as well, so you don't have to do that. But when you log these things and record these things, you can start to see the trajectory of how you're doing. You can find more wins to celebrate. Perhaps you're seeing that your dog is now only reacting to 2 out of the 10 people you walk past, and that's great. And maybe like a month ago, it was like 8 out of the 10 people that they walk past, so things like that you can start noticing. And with this information, if you get more details and you're able to log the location and what was happening in the environment when your dog displayed some of those reactive behaviors, you can then try to set up better for future walks in that area. Or if the reactivity is happening at home, you can be more mindful of kind of where was your dog when that happened and how was the setup like. So you can be more prepared. For example, if there's a certain hotspot on your walk where there's perhaps more traffic or more children going past and things like that, you can also see whether there's some trigger stacking going on where your dog is impacted by several stressful, overwhelming situations that's causing this big explosion of an intense reaction at the end of the day. And yes, please also remember to log the good days and the good moments. So I just want to run you through the apps really quickly. Quick shout out to one of my Instagram followers and friends for recommending this app, Dailyo, to me. So when you're about to log something, they will ask you for your mood. You could set that as how intense your dog's reaction was. So you probably know this best for your own dog. So maybe just as an example, really, the last red emoji could be your dog lunging, barking, snarling. The fourth yellow emoji is your dog just barking. Maybe the middle emoji is your dog kind of lying down and staring and unable to disengage. Maybe the second one in green that says good is your dog kind of staring a little bit, but then able to disengage. And maybe the first one, the one that says rad, is your dog just being able to walk past the trigger, not a care in the world. So then you can input what the trigger was, make a quick note, perhaps where was it happening, how far away it was, what was the trigger doing, for example, what was the dog kind of doing at the time. So maybe it was a dog that was barking at your dog first, or maybe staring more intensely at your dog, or was it a person holding an umbrella and your dog's kind of unsure of that, and you can always include a photo if you happen to have taken one. And finally, it will show you kind of the trend of that day, as well as create a chart if you continue to log these observations every day, so you can kind of see your trajectory of how things are going for you. So Bearable, the other app, is not too different. I like the way that it charts things, and hopefully we all like a bit of a graph here. It has more options for perhaps how intense the reaction was, so you can assign those in a way that makes sense for you. And of course, you can input the trigger and add some additional details as well, much like the earlier app, Dailyo. So with this information, you can consider what you can do next. Reactions happen, and after they do, we can then focus on what to do after, both in the immediate sense and in the future. We mentioned what to do in the future, like setting things up better for your dog, being more prepared in certain hotspot areas, understanding the distance that your dog needs. But there are things you can do in the immediate sense as well to help your dog, based on how much or how intense your dog's reactive behaviors were and how much lingering stress signals they're showing. You can try and find things to help your dog relax and decompress, and then really try to keep triggers low for the rest of the day as much as you can. So for example, after the reaction, if you're not close to home yet, you can take a quieter but perhaps longer route home so that your dog can have more time to just sniff and relax that way. You can try scattering some treats in the grass so that you can encourage your dog to sniff a bit more. Or when you get home, you can give your dog some gentle enrichment like a snuffle mat, some treats in a rolled towel, a licky mat with cheese or dog safe peanut butter or natural chew, or more kind of treat scatters in the garden and backyard, but only, if that's a space where your dog actually does feel relaxed in, because I know some dogs do feel quite anxious in the backyard. So that's another thing to consider. I emphasize gentle enrichment activities here because sometimes there is a bit of a misconception that with enrichment stuff, we want to challenge our dogs with these toys and we want to give them the ones that are longest to do or are the hardest to do. But that's not really the case. Especially if you're trying to help your dog calm down and feel more relaxed. When an enrichment toy or puzzle toy is too challenging, you can be increasing your dog's frustration, and that's not going to be very good or very helpful, and can make things a little bit worse as well. Another thing just to mention that I work on with my clients is Take a Breath, which is from Dr. Karen Overall's relaxation protocol and Leslie McDevitt's control and leash. So that's also something that I use to help even my own dog relax, because basically it's about teaching our dog to take a breath through their nose and then, asking them whether they can take a breath. And then that can also help with calming them down a little bit. So that's for changing our mindset to see behavior as information. Let's move on to focusing on what matters, which seems really simple logically, but emotionally it isn't, because we are human beings and we have feelings, and that is absolutely valid. So focus on what matters to you, like how you and your dog feels, as opposed to how your dog's behavior looks like on the surface and how your handling of your dog looks like to other people. Again, I know that that is totally natural for us. Those feelings are valid because we are social species, and trying to fit in is naturally really important to us. We generally want to be liked, even by people we may not know very well, like neighbors or strangers. Culturally, I think for some of us, we may also worry about being a burden to other people and worry about upsetting them. So that exists as well. And that's one that I definitely feel sometimes. Focusing on how your dog's behavior looks like, and what others think, can also lead us down a path of maybe doing things to our dogs that may not be so good for them, or may hinder and get in the way of what you're trying to achieve with them. So for example, making our dogs go to a cafe to show that they can be at a cafe and be really obedient, when the dog is actually feeling really uncomfortable and stressed out inside, but they're too overwhelmed to react. Or perhaps we end up suppressing behaviors through aversive training techniques with punishment, and because punishment can work momentarily and can stop the behavior for the moment, we may continue using it, and that can have a huge negative impact on a dog's welfare, especially if we think about how often reactive dogs are already feeling uncomfortable in some way, whether that's fear or frustration or even existing pain issues. So adding more discomfort, adding more pain is not generally a good idea. So when we focus too much on kind of how things look and what other people think, we can end up putting a lot of energy into that emotionally, and it also impacts what we end up doing with our dogs. And really, we want to be able to spend our time and energy wisely so that our dogs and ourselves can have rest and fun, whether that's together or on your own, and whatever that looks like for you. So first of all, to focus on what really matters, you can spend less time on obedience work with your dog. I think we would need to remember that reactivity is not an obedience issue. It's not your dog trying to be the alpha or trying to, go against you and make you really upset on purpose. That's all kind of debunked. Really, it's about helping our dogs with how they're feeling and helping them cope, really. So a tight obedience here or sit on cue all the time isn't going to help. I know it's common to think that making a dog sit when there's a trigger will somehow help because maybe it's a stationary behavior, it's a stationary position, and they're less able to lunge from that. But really, sometimes this can make things worse if a dog is feeling more trapped in these positions. Perhaps instead of lunging and barking, they'd actually like to move away for once, which is great. But then making them sit is going to result in them not being able to do that, increasing more frustration and potentially increasing the intensity of their reaction towards that trigger and so on. The other thing is that if a dog has some physical pain or discomfort going on in their bodies, which can happen when it comes to reactive and fearful dogs, then making them sit, maybe putting them in a position that is more tiring, more strenuous for them, and potentially exacerbating some pain or discomfort that they are already experiencing. Similarly, with tight heel on the left, if they have to keep looking up at you on your walk, in a very fixed way like this, they don't get to organize their body in a way that is more comfortable. And so that can be quite, strained as well. And they may miss out on doing some things that are more important for them to relax, like sniffing. So if your dog does a lot of automatic sits because of their learning history, if you want to, you can reinforce them for more stands as well. So if you see them offering a stand, you can just treat them for it, things like that. So I touched on this a little bit already about not worrying about what other people think. Again, I know this is hard and not everyone around understands. I think it's particularly hard when family and friends don't understand what us and our dogs are going through. I know it's normal for us to have this temptation maybe to punish our dogs in some way, whether that's to just scold them or yank on the leash to show whoever is close by and watching that, we have control. But I recommend trying to refrain from doing that. I personally make it a huge point to set the example of treating my dog really kindly in these moments so that other people can see that actually, there is another way and they don't have to punish their dog or yell at their dog, and that it's okay to be kind and soft with our dogs. I think that the world definitely needs more examples of being kind and compassionate and soft. And, something that you can do that may really help is try and find yourself a community of dog guardians with reactive or fearful dogs that have similar values to you in terms of training methods. I think it's good to have a place where you can celebrate each other's successes, feel supported during the low times, share resources even. That can be with a Facebook group or, a group chat, or following certain accounts on Instagram, sharing your own journey if you feel comfortable with that. Not everybody has to, but it can help, with someone else reading it, and you can make connections with people that will understand what you're going through. So I find that community is something that is so important, and that can really help us grow and really feel less alone. And of course, I must say that practicing being safe on the internet is always recommended and advisable. But, as you're doing this, try not to compare your dog to other people's dogs. Every dog will have their own journey. Every dog is an individual. They have different learning histories and experiences, and there's so many factors that impact behavior. So there is no way to compare our dog to someone else's dog. And, trying to do so will bring us more unnecessarily stress and pressure. Remember, it's not a competition at all. If any of you growing up experienced your parents comparing you to other friends' kids, then you know how stressful and emotionally hard comparison can be. So, it's not nice. But know that your dog is wonderful. Despite some of their behaviors, fears, and worries, I can always see, the loveliness in a dog whenever someone tells me about the issues that they have, because I know so many dogs with reactive behaviors who are just the cuddliest and sweetest babies. Some of you may have those dogs and know that I'm only slightly jealous because Dave is not really the cuddliest of dogs. And next, do celebrate the wins. we all have a negativity bias, and we tend to dwell on the bad stuff more and notice the good stuff less. So we focus on a lot of what went wrong, and it's very, very normal for people to do that. That's why recording observations, like I mentioned earlier, is so important, because it's hard to recognize progress without logging the progress, especially if you are getting negative feedback from the people around you. And, sometimes that progress will look like nothing for a while until you suddenly notice, oh, my dog, they just did that really well. And I didn't realize he was ready for that. So really look at how far you've come, because maybe our dogs have made so many improvements over the last year or the last few months, but we kind of get bogged down by the challenging stuff that is happening right now, that we miss all of those moments, and we forget how far we've come, and that they still have the potential to, do even more. Okay, so now on to the next big point. I know this sounds cliche, but less is more, it really is. So what I mean by less is more in this case is that we can really think about training less, doing less, and allowing for more flexibility as opposed to a very fixed kind of structure. I know it seems to kind of go against what we imagine, which is that we have to work really hard and train really hard to make progress. And while yes, of course, there are times where it can feel like hard work, and especially because we definitely have to be open to adjusting some part of our lives to improve the welfare of our dogs, to meet their needs and accommodate some of how they're feeling. But doing kind of too much in terms of training and things like that can also backfire. So let's dive a little bit deeper into that. Let's start with training less. Sometimes we can really overtrain our dogs, and our dogs can get really frustrated or tired, which isn't so helpful. I am 100% guilty of this. I used to train my dog Dave for way, way, way too long. And it got to a point where he just stopped wanting to train with me anymore at all. Like he was like, nope. So he would go and lie down in his bed, and no matter how much salmon or chicken I toss into my training mat, he was like, yeah, no, I'm not doing that. I'm going to stay in my bed and pretend to sleep. You figure yourself out, Rachel. And I thought there was something wrong with him. So I actually took him to the vet, and he was absolutely fine. So it just turned out to be kind of a me problem, as it turns out sometimes. And that I was just kind of getting him to do too much. And while he liked the food and he liked all that kind of stuff, it was just too much. And so even though, he enjoys training for the most part, doing it too much for too long stopped being fun. So that can end up being quite counterproductive. And I think thinking that we have to train for long periods of time every single day is really stressful, especially if we have other things going on in our lives. So, what can we do to make sure that we are still doing something with our dogs? I'm not saying don't train your dog at all. But what you can do is potentially you can try and make a list of things that you are working with your dog, or things that you want to work with your dog. Then pick 1 to 3 things each day and do them for very short periods of time, like 1 to 3 minutes. That short? Yes, that short. And you can spread these little short training sessions out. So, do you have to work on something different every day? Not necessarily. I think it's better if you have choice and see what you feel like doing on that day, because at least then you are working on something, even if it was the same thing as the day before. So that part shouldn't be too overwhelming when you have a little bit of choice in that. So if you end up doing the same thing, training the same thing that you find fun for 3 days in a row, that's okay as well. That's all right. Also, if you feel like you're not getting very far with a new behavior you're working on, once you hit 2 minutes or 3 minutes, stop. You don't have to end on a perfect rep, because if you're not getting the thing you want, you're either going to be withholding reinforcement, so withholding that treat from your dog for way too long, until they get a bit frustrated, or you're going to end up rehearsing the quote unquote error. And if you can just stop and kind of come back to it later in the day, or even the next day, or even a few days later, you would have had time to think about how you can set the environment up better, how to deliver your treats better in a way that makes sense for the particular thing that you're doing, and, all of that good stuff. And also, allow your dog and yourself 1 or 2 days of no training in a week. Just dedicate a day or two each week to say, okay, we're having a break today, no training, we'll play, we'll do enrichment, we'll work on puzzles together, but no training. It's not going to make your training worse. It's not going to let things slip, I promise. This is part of letting go of that internalized capitalist ideas and realizing that we don't always have to be doing a lot of things all the time. Otherwise, we're unproductive failures. I've actually often found that if I'm working on something new with Dave, if we have a little break of not doing it, even up to like a week or something, he will not only remember what it was that we were working on, but he'll even do it better, whether that's with more precision or less latency, which means he gets into the behavior quicker. So next is to allow for some flexibility. I know that we kind of hear a lot about how routine is helpful. And more recently, unfortunately, we're hearing a lot about the word, structure. That's in quotes, where you control a lot of your dog's life and tell them what to do all the time, so they can only go sniff where you tell them to do so, or they can only stay in one place, like their place bed, until you tell them they can move. And of course, I have a lot of strong feelings against that. But putting all that aside, if you're thinking about routines like feeding, walking, playing, all of that kind of being at a certain time, a certain fixed time, I actually recommend having some slight flexibility with that, because being flexible can actually help our dogs cope better during times where there may be changes to that routine, or we may need to have time away from our dogs, or we physically just can't do all of those things with our dogs at those fixed times. So if you have any chronic pain issues, that can be something that definitely you can consider. So to do this, to add some flexibility, like we mentioned earlier, you can take 1 or 2 days as no train days, and then you can randomize when you're having those no train days. It can be a different day of the week. You can do training at slightly varied times of the day. With walks, there may be days where it will be valuable to have a no walk day for your dog to kind of stay home and decompress if walks are getting a little bit too stressful for them. And you can make up for it with more enrichment at home, or you can bring stuff like fallen twigs and leaves and rocks home for your dog to sniff, as long as they're safe, as part of that whole enrichment on a no walk day. And so you can also randomize when you're having a no walk day, and maybe sometimes it's a no walk day, sometimes it's just a super short pee walk. But that way, in the event where perhaps you're feeling unwell, you can take a no walk day and your dog will not mind it as much as compared to if their routine has always been super fixed. If you're wondering about the toileting aspect, if you have a backyard for your dog to toilet in, that is great. But if not, I am personally not against teaching a dog to pee in the dedicated area in the house, like the bathroom or something like that. I think it can be really helpful sometimes on days where your dog just can't go out. But yes, so just as a little personal note, I have a condition called hiatus hernia, which is a very painful stomach thing that comes on 2 or 3 times a year. I'm in a lot of pain for about a week when I have it, and that means I can't take my dog Dave out on walks. Sometimes my partner can help, but sometimes he can't because of work. So Dave is used to having the occasional very short walk day, or a no walk morning where he gets a longer walk with my partner in the evening, and he copes well with that. Of course, being human, I still sometimes feel a bit of that guilt. I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry, Dave, and I feel like, oh no, is he bored? So, I'm telling you all of this, but as human, we definitely still hold on to that, but it's really just about being more mindful about all of these things. So I know what that feels like. with meal times, it's good to be somewhat at the same time so your dog isn't too hungry, of course. But you can, vary that very slightly so it's not necessarily on the dot timing in case, you come back late from work or come back late for any other reason. Now, I mentioned routines, and of course, predictability is important. Knowing what's going to happen can help our dogs be more at ease. And so it is an important part of building trust and helping our dogs feel safe and giving them more control in their lives. You can build predictability for your dog through things like consent tests, where you pet them for 3 seconds or up to a count of 3 and stop and then see whether they want more. And it can be things like being consistent with your reinforcement. That means delivering your reinforcement, like treats, for example, consistently when your dog does a certain behavior, especially one that you've asked them for. And predictability can come with a couple of things in a day that are predictable, like meal times, like we mentioned, for example, or simple things, like a nighttime cuddle on the sofa. And basically, it's important also to remember not to trick dogs into things that they are uncomfortable or scary for them. So that's just a quick note on predictability. It ties in sort of with the idea of routine, but you can make it so that your dog predicts and expects some flexibility in the routine that you have. So talking about avoidance is valid. I know a lot of people feel iffy about this one sometimes because it feels as if we're never working on a problem. We're always just avoiding. But there is nothing wrong with sticking to just management and running away from triggers with your dog from time to time. You don't have to train with every single trigger present if you don't feel like you or your dog are up to that day. And in a way, teaching your dog that they do have the options to move away instead of react, and reinforcing them for running away with you can be really helpful. So till this day, if my dog Dave encounters another dog that he's not very keen on, maybe it's one that's, a bit too bouncy or something like that, he just moves away himself. So he does this big swerve away from them. And that's great. That beats lunging and barking and growling. And for us as well, knowing that there's something stressful and knowing that we can allow ourselves to just take a moment to avoid it helps to ease us too. So we don't have to deal with the stress of it. And instead, if we feel kind of more at ease and more comfortable, we can think more clearly about next steps and what to do at the next spot where we might run into another trigger. So also, another thing you can consider with this is to just have days where you take your dog out to a rented private field, if that is something that's available to you. In the UK, there are quite a few options of this where you can rent quite a lot of space actually for an hour for your dog to run around with the reassurance that there won't be any other triggers around. But be sure to write into the place that you plan to rent to ensure that it will be quiet and that no one and no other animals will be around, because one of my friends had in the past booked a rented field and it turned out that there were a whole bunch of horses next to the field, and that was, they were very much visible through the fence, so that wasn't so great for their dog. So do check on that ahead of your time if you can. There's also sniff spots in the US, I believe, and if none of this is available to you, not possible, you can look for a time where there is no one at a dog park. So that could be really early in the morning or late at night, which again, I know not everyone is comfortable with, but it's just another potential option I thought I'd mention here. So apart from all of that, do allow yourself time away from your dog if you can. Allow yourself time to do things you enjoy without your dog. Sometimes as kind of hardcore dog guardians, dog people, that is hard to imagine. Going on a walk without my dog, that's weird. But you can do that. You can go on a walk or a hike by yourself without your dog. You can go to a cafe by yourself without your dog even. If you're just gonna sit there and have one coffee and read a book, that's still a nice break. And taking that time away allows you to have a moment of reset and having that little rest. You can have a friend or family member or trusted pet sitter that you've been working with to help you look after your dog while you're out, especially if your dog has any separation related issues as well. So don't be afraid to ask for help. It doesn't make you less than, it doesn't make you irresponsible. You know, what you are doing is helping you and your dog's overall situation. Also, just as a little note, ask your pet sitter to give you as few or as many updates as you want, because some of us, I know, we may want to know what's happening with our dogs all the time when we're out, and that makes us feel more at ease. But for some of us, receiving that constant update can give us more anxiety and prevent us from being able to relax on our time off. So this is really something individual, and you'll know that best for yourself. However, you know, if your dog doesn't have separation related issues and they are happy on their own for a few hours, that's great too. They can have a little good rest by themselves, a little bit of me time. I know Dave loves a bit of me time. He likes a bit of peace and quiet away from his humans walking around the house all the time. So there it is. And I just want to remind everyone that looking after yourself will in turn allow you to help your dog more effectively, which will then aid in their progress. I know that this community, the force-free or positive reinforcement-based community, you know, we really strive to be compassionate for our dogs, but we must not forget to have compassion for ourselves and our bodies too, especially when it comes to our dogs that display reactive and fearful behaviors. It can have such a huge impact on our emotional well-being and what we can deal with at a particular time. Our dogs having a reaction, you know, while it doesn't seem ideal and is really stressful at the time, it's not the end of the world. And I promise you have not broken your dog. I often find that it is also harder working with our own dogs because of all of the emotional and personal stuff that comes along with it. We can sometimes take it really personally also when our dogs behave a certain way. So that can make it hard for us to think more objectively about what we want to do with them. Sometimes we may also be very used to seeing our dogs look or move or behave in a certain way that it takes having someone else to point that out and be like, you know, hey, that's kind of interesting. Oh, hey, look at how far you've come. Because, you know, even as dog trainers, it's still harder to work with our own dogs. And that's also why working with a professional can be so important, because you're having someone help you look at things more objectively. And that's even as we are trainers as well. So if any of you are trainers here, you know, trainers can have trainers too to help with their own dogs. I have personally found that to be really helpful. But, you know, remember that you and your dog are a great team, and every little thing that you do with kindness for them helps to play a part in their progress and their emotional well-being. Don't feel like just because you are taking a little break that things will go wrong altogether. You know, the things that you do together and that maybe you don't even think about can be contributing to the progress without you realizing it, like cuddling on the sofa because you're providing your dog a comfortable place to rest after maybe a stressful day of many triggers out and about, and you're helping them feel safe by being close to you. You know, it's things like this we have to give more credit to. It's not all about training only. And don't forget to celebrate the little wins, the big wins, all the wins, because you will have them. And for anyone listening here who's also a dog professional, I hope that we can make our industry kinder for the human end of the leash as well, you know, like many of you already are, and really minimize the overwhelm for our clients and understand the environmental and systemic issues that may be affecting them as well. At the same time, if you are a dog trainer and you have a reactive or fearful dog in your life, please be kind to yourself too. Like I said, working with our own dogs is always going to be harder. I definitely find it hard too when things come up with Dave and I question a lot about everything. So all of that doesn't change just because you're a dog trainer. So extend that kindness and compassion you have for your clients and their dogs to yourself as well. Us and our dogs, we are all sentient beings here. So we're not just going to be like robotic and perfect. That's why it's about allowing ourselves to kind of have that space to make mistakes, rest, and do things that aren't necessarily, focused on progress. So thank you all so much for listening. I hope that has been helpful to you. I hope it's brought you some reassurance and comfort. You're welcome to reach out to me. I'm most active on Instagram at dog_@heart. If you can't reach me there, please drop me an email, or if you need more help and want to work with me, you can book a call with me through the link on my website. But yeah, so if you got any questions or comments, I will be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Rachel. That is a ton of information and a lot of good pep talks and tips in there. We do have some good questions for you.
Right.
One of them, the first part, was not necessarily a question, but it's hard not to worry about what other people think when they see the reaction or even the cause of the reaction. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I know that's really hard. I think it's a very natural thing that happens. And so I think that's why I bring it up, because we have to be quite mindful about that, also, I think if you think about yourself, and if you think about some dogs that you've seen or some people that you've seen, how much time do you spend thinking about them? I don't think we spend, it just goes past us. We probably in the moment you're a bit annoyed or something like that, but it does go away and you forget about it quite soon. So just think that is happening for other people, right? So maybe for a moment, maybe it's more like they're not like upset or anything, they're more like concerned. Maybe it's out of care. So you might get looks because people are like, oh, I hope they're okay. It can be like that. We never know what necessarily people are thinking, especially if we're talking about strangers. But just kind of know that maybe they're not thinking as hard about it. But I think when it comes to kind of family and friends, that can be quite difficult. So maybe it's about just not talking about it, not talking about your dog, having other friends that you can talk to about your dog, and maybe friends and family, just put that topic aside for a while, maybe. Yeah.
So another question more on the technique side, do you prefer counter conditioning versus looking at incompatible behaviors?
Okay, I've seen the second part as well. So I've had a lot of success giving a dog task obedience. Yeah, I mean, if that has been working for you, that's great as well. For me, I also teach some behaviors that are incompatible, but they're not necessarily obedience based. So yeah, tricks, we do some tricks, for example, dog standing in the middle, giving them somewhere safe to be. But at the same time, with a lot of things that I teach in terms of like pattern games as a control and leash instructor, it's about creating kind of safe patterns and behaviors that your dog knows that they have a choice, first of all, to participate in. And that if they're not feeling up for it, that is just information for us. So these games that we play give us more information, so look at that. Things like that can be really helpful. But when I mention obedience, I suppose, to be more specific, it's that really strict obedience that you see where your dog has to hold that down stay or that sit stay while the trigger is going past, which may not always be the most helpful for them, if that makes sense. And we really want to work on changing their emotions. So whatever you're doing to help your dog feel better, and if what you're doing right now is helping, that's okay. Yeah.
I love this question. We'd love to know more about the services that you offer. Do you work with clients beyond just reactivity? And also, how can people send you some money?
Oh, thank you. That's so kind. So to start off with, I mainly run this reactivity program. But if you have a dog that kind of isn't that sort of lunge and barking reactive kind of dog, I would still work with fearful dogs. A lot of what we do on the program still applies. And on the program, we also touch on cooperative care. So it's quite an inclusive, long program that we all work on together, if that makes sense. So that's kind of what I focus on. So, it's easier for my headspace to focus on the one thing that's been more helpful for me. And in terms of financial, thank you again. Thank you. I have a link in my Instagram bio for a buy me a coffee if you really want to do that, but I appreciate it.
We can also include that when we post the YouTube video too.
Oh, thank you.
Any tips for encouraging a dog to decompress or relax after returning home from walks? Ours comes back totally riled up.
Yeah, that can definitely happen. If you have some space, I find that, some garden time, if the garden again is a comfortable place for them, just doing a treat scatter, something simple like that can be helpful. Sorry, I've got a shaky dog up there. So I've got a whiny little dog. So with a little treat scatter, if your dog isn't eating the treat necessarily, if they are at least kind of sniffing around, that can be helpful. Sometimes maybe they just need a moment to do a big zoomy or something like that. That's also okay. Just kind of wait for that. And then immediately after, if you can see them calm down, that would be good. So I did give some recommendations earlier, like licky mats, snuffle mats, scatter feeding, all of those things. If you can try that, that would be helpful. On top of that, if you're working with any trainer on kind of lying down on a mat, but in a way that is, relaxing and they have a choice to leave, that can also be helpful as well. So you can work on that as another behavior. But yeah, I know that can be hard and it just takes a little bit of time, really. Yeah.
So another piece is we need to plan our responses for when people make nasty comments such as control your dog is mean. I think this is it's a really hard thing when, sometimes you see that person, you're like, they probably don't care, they've probably moved on, they're not thinking about me. But sometimes people actively say mean things. Any suggestions there?
Oh my God. So this is one that I personally find really hard. I am, even though I'll teach people about how to advocate for your dog and stuff, I personally find it really hard. I don't know if many of you have heard me talk about this, but there's been someone in our neighborhood that lets their dog kind of free roam and then she's nowhere to be found, which is a really scary situation. And the dog will come and pest our dogs. And so when we're like, hey, can you please put your dog on leash? She'll start getting racist and start yelling at us, telling us to F off, all that kind of stuff. So it is very, very hard. And I am more of a conflict avoidant type of person. So when people say control your dog or, tell your dog off or whatever, I just ignore them. In fact, I just continue feeding my dog and be like, good boy. And just kind of just do the opposite, and I mean, just let them pass. It is really hard, but I try to keep a distance anyway. But I know that is tricky.
Yeah, I think there's some situations where, if you're actively involved, like if there's been an issue with the dog's off leash, then you might actually have a situation there. But if people are just being rude out of nowhere,
exactly.
Sometimes it's like, it's not worth saying anything. I also think there's a lot we can learn from folks who work with children who have behavioral issues and, are often misunderstood, where people are like, well, why aren't you controlling your kid? Well, my kid is having a meltdown. Like my kid is struggling. I think there's a lot that we can pull from folks about just telling ourselves and helping explain that our dogs are struggling versus, my kid's just being out, being rude, like sometimes we have tough times. So
exactly.
And the more we can model that, I think one of the hard places is the more we can model that for people who are not actively yelling at us, the more we can build that expectation that like sometimes kids are going to have a moment, right? Sometimes our dogs are going to bark. That helps sort of the overall population, and maybe there's less yelling people in the future.
Exactly. If you feel like you have that emotional space to explain to that person, or it's someone that is just reacting out of maybe fear, maybe they're coming from a place of fear that they've had a bad experience with a dog and things like that, we can be understanding to us and be like, hey, this is what we're going through and we're working on it. It's things like that.
Yep, absolutely. Another question. Oh, could you share the name of your podcast again?
Okay. So it's out of the Woofworks. So it's like Woodworks, but Woofworks. So you can find that anywhere. It's on Spotify, it's on Apple, on Google, anywhere that you listen to podcasts on.
Yep. And we'll include that link as well in the YouTube video. This is a great question. Tips for folks with ADHD or other mental health issues that can make task initiation really difficult. So I know I'm more inclined to finally spend an hour on my dog at some point during the day versus being able to manage outlining short sessions. I totally believe the science about what's best for them, as you have said. So just curious what you recommend or if you've struggled with something similar.
Yeah. So that's what I used to do as well with Dave. So just spend a whole hour kind of training him. And that's kind of what led to some difficult moments. So I think what I try to do now is, because I also only I don't spread it out during the day, even though it's a good idea. What I do is I have this hour, I set everything up, and then we maybe do one thing, and then I'll let him go and sniff in the garden. Maybe I'll go and get a drink, and then I'll come back, and then we'll do another thing. And then maybe that's it, or maybe we'll do something else. So just kind of, you can spend that 1 hour or 1 or 2 hours on your dog, but just having those breaks in between. So, even if it's just like a 15-minute break for your dog to just have a little rest and have a sit down or have a lie down, really, and come back to it, I think that's helpful as well.
Yep. Yeah. Letting them disengage throughout, even if you're staying in that same mindset.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly.
I think we as trainers, we're so used to talking about what our ideal would be, especially in general, that I think people get the idea, especially from social media. Again, part of the topic for the next webinar from Juliana about managing social media. It's really easy to see something like, ideally, you should break things into short steps. And then we go, oh, well, I'm failing. I am not doing that. And I can't do that. Like, I feel like I'm a bad person because I don't have the ability to take my dog on decompression walks. And it's like, well, not everyone does. So
exactly.
It's
and
hard.
I think also with social media and kind of advice that is given in that way, it doesn't leave a lot of space for you to have those nuances. So someone might be wanting to talk about them, but there's not enough character space to kind of add those in. So just be mindful of that. And like a lot of things that you see is maybe just the ideal. And even with what I mentioned, like what we spotted earlier, that can be the ideal. But of course, do things in a way that you feel like works for you, but that also works for your dog.
Yep, absolutely. I'm afraid that my reactive dog might escape from the harness and get into trouble, hurting another dog or human. Any tips for securing the harness?
Okay, so for me, one of the things that I recommend is kind of a safety strap. I know that sometimes they can be a little bit heavy. So if you can find something that's more of a light carabiner, so a safety strap is something that is like a very short leash, is usually adjustable. It attaches to your collar and to the harness, so that if your dog slips out of one, you still have the other one. That's what I usually recommend. It is really hard to say that there is a particular harness that is totally escape proof. I think we have to be mindful that it's not always the case. So that's something that I recommend to make escape less possible. And also, just keep working on making that distance, and just keep working on it with your dog.
Yeah, having that secondary clip can be really helpful. Other things, if I'm working with a dog where I'm nervous about that situation, sometimes muzzle training can just make me feel more safe, right? So that even if they lose the harness, they can't hurt someone else, right? So sometimes that mentally helps. And then my other piece is, I find most people fit harnesses too loose. It's like we're worried that we're going to make it uncomfortable by making it tightly fitted. I always say it's like a belt. Like if it's loose, it doesn't hold your pants up. So, oftentimes with harnesses, I see people with these harnesses that are like moving everywhere, doing all these things. So like, you should be able to fit a couple fingers underneath it, but you shouldn't be able to see light. It shouldn't be moving off your dog's body. So that's another piece too, is making sure that the harness is well fitted for the dog, that makes it a little more comfortable.
Exactly.
But yeah, I'm totally one of those people that muzzle trains just because I'm afraid of the thing.
Yeah.
And it makes me more comfortable to know I don't have to worry about it.
I know. I think that's perfect. And with the harness fitting, I think like you say, sometimes we want it loose, but it's slipping off. And just remember that it might not be that comfortable for your dog if it's too loose and slipping off also. So that may make them want to escape even more. So if you have it nice fitting, and also, we can recommend all of these like harness brands, but every dog is different and they might not fit that harness that you were recommended, so there are things like that to consider. Every dog has like their own little weird shape, so just be mindful of that as well. You might have to try a few to get the one that really fits them.
And the one that you like too. Like everybody loves their long lines. I'm one of those people who I don't like long lines, and they make me uncomfortable. And so it's like, okay, cool, if you're a person who wants the 30-foot long line and that does well with your dog, great. If you want a 15-foot long line, awesome. If you want a muzzle, great. They're whatever feels most comfortable.
Exactly. Exactly.
What should you do if you have a family member who has seen your dog be reactive on leash to a dog and just assumes he is aggressive?
Oh, oh, yeah. I mean, this also depends whether they have a dog as well and how much they want your dog to meet their dog, because that's a case that I've seen also. Try your best to explain to them, and you can use like analogies that you think might help them, be more empathetic about it. Again, I think this is one of those things that depends on how close you are with that particular family, that you might want to really just sit them down and also talk to them about the progress you're making, because I'm sure that there is progress going on, and it just takes time, because all of this is about healing, all of this is about emotional stuff and growth and things like that. And so it does take time, so just tell them that you're working on it. And I think the idea that our dogs are aggressive, sometimes people are quick to use that label, but everyone can have aggressive behaviors. It's not that now you are aggressive, it's just that in certain situations you might feel like you need to be aggressive, and that's one way that you can explain it, because at this moment he doesn't know of other ways to express himself, or things like that. And so we are working on it. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, we have just a couple minutes left. Last two questions. One, when would you consider muzzling? I have a reactive dog and live in an apartment. We go out at quiet times, but sometimes avoiding people isn't possible. The stress is high every time we leave, but I'm also wondering how long it takes to get them comfortable with a muzzle.
Yeah, I mean, a muzzle training for you might be quite a priority to have then, if that is kind of the environment that you have. In terms of how long it takes, this is going to be an annoying answer, but it depends. It really depends on how your dog takes to things like that. If you have a muzzle now, is a good time to start. I do have a muzzle training tutorial on my YouTube and Instagram, so that's something that maybe we could put in the links or something like that. Yeah, it just takes time, and it depends on how often you can work on it either. But some dogs who are more gear shy, they're more sensitive, then they might take a longer time. But some dogs, those that are quite happy to wear a coat or wear a funny outfit or things like that, then they might take to it a little bit quicker as well. It really depends. So with my own dog, because I was doing it in the shelter, it was only like once a week, then it felt like it took 2 years, but really, maybe if I had him for longer, then if I adopted him earlier, then we would have done it a little bit sooner.
Yep, there are some people who it's a couple of weeks and then they're done, and other people, based on the dog, it can take a lot longer.
Yeah.
And then last question, I love this one. I can't afford an assistant or someone else to handle a dog at this time. How do you safely set up an environment to train around other dogs?
Okay, so I'm going to guess this is kind of outside on walks and things like that. So because I work virtually, most of my clients really work with kind of dogs that are in real life. So one of the things that we start off with in terms of training is training with things that are not really triggers. And, if we do look at that, then they're doing it with, let's say, people, which they are fine with. And then over time, building it to dogs at a distance, but they already know the cue. So yeah, I know it can be hard if, we don't have an assistant, but at the same time, I think it's quite good also to work with dogs in real life. And I'm thinking about my own Dave, and I never really worked with an assistant in terms of his reactivity when I adopted him. So it was just about working with dogs in real life. I mean, they're all in real life, but you know what I mean. But yeah, I guess it makes for sometimes less predictable moments. But if you kind of know your environment, where you're going, whether it's going to be quiet or someone's going to be at a distance, or if you can work in your front garden, things like that, or you can build it up, you can bring things into the house. So, the scent of another dog or things like that, or your dog listening to some dogs barking. So kind of breaking it down for your dog is possible until you get to train with other dogs. And of course, all the safety considerations when you're doing that in terms of muzzle training, being on leash, safety strap, all of those things.
Yep. And then a great comment, just thanks for mentioning queer phobia and racism as a reality, and that they can influence our energy left in the tank for walking our dogs and feeling like we have to represent well. So I think, those are always part of everything. So thank you for bringing those up. Thank you so much, Rachel, for being here. I know you have some dogs to get to. Thank you so much for spending your time with us on a Saturday for folks joining us. Again, I will send out the link to this hopefully tomorrow. Once I get it uploaded to YouTube, I will include some links. Rachel, if you'll send them to me, I'll make sure I have everything. I'll get that uploaded, and then stay tuned for the next webinar about social media and how to navigate that with dogs, as well as about anxiety in people, anxiety in dogs, and how those might mix. So lots of cool stuff coming up. Thanks again to Maddie's for this webinar. And thank you so much, Rachel, for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. This was great. Thank you, everyone.
See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.